During the pandemic, there's no doubt that state governments really have come to the fore again, especially as Morrison sort of essentially evacuated the field and everything was too hard. And the Premier's had to step up, and it's been a really tough time for our fellow Victorians. And it would have been really tough, and Luke was in the cabinet and Natalie's been in the cabinet. A lot of hard decisions which really we never thought we'd have to make in our time, and lockdowns and people not being able to get to go to the funerals of their loved ones, the borders shut. There was the Ring of Steel around Melbourne, then there was the border at Albury. I've travelled, when I was very young, I might say, but I travelled to East Germany, not at courtesy of the East German government, but I was backpacked there and Czechoslovakia and Russia, and there you had to carry your papers and you had border police and security. That was quite unusual for a little Aussie kid. But then when I would drive up to Canberra, because Qantas never had any flights to Canberra from Melbourne, you'd have to go through a police checkpoint at Calcallo, then another one at Albury-Wodonga. It's been a most extraordinary time, things that we never thought we'd see. I know I had the privilege of working indeed with Pasu and others trying to help alleviate some of the tension at the high-rise flats in Flemington and North Melbourne when there was that shutdown. That was a very difficult time. And you all have your stories. And you would have thought that presenting to the people after that, whilst you've done a lot of good things, there'd be just a lot of angst and frustration about government. Because a lot of people who've never thought about government started to think about government. And that's not just the sort of idiots at the front of the CFMEU or the gym junkies or there's been quite an unholy coalition of people who've been anti-everyone have emerged, and in part because humans, we've learned to sort of suspend our suspicion of governments and accept government direction, but in many ways COVID is the most unusual experience most of us, barring a war, will ever have in our lives. That for some people it just got too much. They were like a sponge which filled up with too much water and just everything's got too hard. And there's no judgment in that, but therefore you would have thought that as a government presented itself afterwards, despite its strong record of getting things done, there's just angst out in the community. And I think that angst is there. But what's interesting is that Labor is so competitive leading up to this election. The pandemic either made governments or it broke them. And generally it's broken governments. But I think at the states and the Andrews government, it has given them a story to tell which, whilst not everyone agrees, everyone respects the strength of the government. They mightn't like it, but they'll acknowledge the strength. What's surprised me is that the Liberals and Matthew Guy, they remind me a bit of the Sydney Swans in the grand final. You never know what can happen next 3.5 weeks, I get that. But they're in the finals, but they're just not there. But that doesn't mean the election's easy. I think what we'll see in this election coming up is something which we didn't see in 2014 and 2018 in the state. We're going to have long ballot papers in the Legislative Assembly. As former federal leader of Labor, I used to get envious when, the only choices you had in Victoria was Liberal, Labor or Green. That meant if you didn't want to vote for the Liberals, we would get your vote. But next time round, I think that we're going to see a lot of small parties at least offer a protest alternative to people who are not happy with the big parties, as Shorten